join us today to give us a little bit of a briefing, more of a public briefing than was available on Friday on the budget. So what I'd like to do is just start out with a quick committee introductions, starting on my way.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Roger Cates. I represent ASTA, China, Oakland, Sydney, Ambassador, and State Senate. And it's a particular pleasure to see our former colleague, Representative Kesha, here this afternoon.
Thanks for the shout. Speak for the shout.
Good afternoon. I'm Linda Valentino, and I represent State Senate District 31, which is Saco, Fullerton Beach, Hollis, Leamington, and Fairfax.
Good afternoon. I'm Representative Linda Sanborn, and I represent Aurora.
Good afternoon. I'm Representative Bob Nine. I represent District 77. That includes the towns of Oakland and Sydney.
Good afternoon. I'm Representative Eric Jorgensen. I represent the City of Portland.
Good afternoon. I'm Representative Chuck Timberlake. I represent District 75, Turner, Leeds, and Paddington.
My name is Tom Winter, and I represent District 71 in Wisconsin, Waterfield, Westbury.
John Martin, House District 151, which runs from Allagash to Lake Kent and down Route 11 to Oxbow.
Good afternoon, welcome. I'm Peggy Rotundo. I represent House District 59, which is part of Lewiston, and I'm the House Chair of the Appropriations Committee.
And Senator Jim Camper from Oxford, 13 towns in western Maine. I want to remind everybody this is pretty much a briefing so that there will be questions and that sort of thing. We do have a time schedule somewhere else to be at 1 o'clock, so we're down to, on my watch, about 57 minutes. I'd like to bring Commissioner Rosen forward, and if we do have time for some questions, otherwise you got 57 minutes.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Hamper, Representative Rotundo, members of the Appropriations Committee. Very happy to be before you. As you mentioned, Richard Rosen, serving as Commissioner of the Department of Administrative and Financial Services. And appreciate the invitation to come before the committee and provide you with a general overview of the Governor's 2016-2017 biennial budget. And what I thought perhaps I would do, as is the tradition in previous initial budget overviews, is to keep it fairly high level, to go through a series of components that relate to assumptions that underlie the budget and some other general overview, and save any particular in-depth or detailed questions that you have for a particular program in a particular department or agency, be able to bring forward that commissioner or those individuals that can talk to those specifics in greater expertise. But I thought initially it perhaps would be helpful for the committee if we started with the building blocks and the components behind the budget. So why don't I have a series of handouts here. So what I would suggest is beginning with the handout that is titled 2016-2017 Biennial Budget Assumptions as it relates to Personal Services. And I just want to walk through that one, and then we will move on to the other three. To try to give you a flavor of some of the major components or in some of the underlying assumptions. So in this particular handout, as I say, it deals with person services, and we have 3 bullets here under salary information, and it talks to position calculations, and that the calculations that we have put in the budget do not include or assume any increases for future collective bargaining agreements. Those obviously are yet to be negotiated and developed, so there's no way of making those assumptions at this point. This budget does include the merit increase, which is calculated for each position and reflected with valid merit rate and the top set of the salary schedule in which those positions are assigned, in addition to the longevity funding. So in other words, the merits and longevity are funded for both years of the biennial budget as proposed in this budget. You're used to seeing in past budgets an attrition initiative. When we developed the baseline is a component of what we refer to as the structural gap analysis. That analysis is required at the end of September. It projects ahead and projects revenue and projects spending and provides the baseline from which we begin to work. We included an attrition rate of 1.6% as a builder. The budget itself has built in a 3% reduction as it relates to an attrition factor. I know members of the committee are familiar with that. In past years, we have had an attrition factor of 4% and then 1 year 5%. This current year, 15 to 6%, we really was with a 3% attrition factor. So we dial that back considerably. The next component here are simply the definitions of position count. This tends to be sometimes a point of confusion. You may have already had this discussion with members of the fiscal staff, but we're simply providing the definition for the full-time equivalent count and the definition for the legislative count, as you see here in the budget. We then go through a process of calculating the rates and assumed costs associated with many of the items that are a component of the benefit package, the current state employees and retirees, and that's what you are seeing here, the assumptions that are built in. So for instance, as it relates to the dental benefit, the budget assumes an increase of 5% rates in 16 and 9.725 in 17 over the current FY15 rates for dental insurance. And you see an example of a monthly dental rates. We do the same, obviously, for health insurance. Active health insurance rates for FY16 and 17, assuming that the Health Commission makes design changes to the plan, we will limit the premium increases to 50% of the original projected actuarial rates, which were based on the plan design unchanged from the current. We therefore are assuming, in for budget purposes, rate increases that are funded at 6.1% in FY16 and 10.4% in FY15. So just to point out the process there, because you know the Health Commission is the oversight management operation, essentially, of an equal number of members from management and members representing employees, and they review the components of the state health benefit. The actuaries develop their projections of expected future costs, and those came in, and this is a level of increase that represents 50% of the actual cost that is projected. So the Commission is continuing with their work of developing the actual plan design to be able to essentially accommodate the other 50% of the increase in costs that are expected. Retiree health insurance. Based on the revised actuarial evaluation, the estimate needed in FY16 is $56.1 million, and FY17 is $60 million. And as you see from the narrative here, the costs are distributed against the base payroll. You see the base payroll is FY16 and FY17, and the translation of that rate of 9.99% for 16 and 10.5 for 17. Retired teacher health insurance. Again, as you know, the state contributes a portion of the retired teacher health insurance. The retired teachers are obviously employees of the local school administrative unit, but the state has traditionally provided a component of retired teacher health insurance costs. We again have run the projections here. The increase in the state's total costs. The retired teacher health insurance premiums for fiscal 15 is budgeted at no more than a percentage increase in the CPI. This is language that was adopted in the budget in 2013, and when you read through that language and you perform the calculation, then the translation of the funding necessary you see in the bottom line. 32.2 million in FY16 and 37.3 million in FY17, and we show the general fund increase that represents for both years. Retirement. While the rates vary by plan and option, retirement costs for a majority of physicians, about 85%, were calculated using the following rates. FI08 and FI09 represent years 21 and 20, respectively, of the UAL amortization schedule. So we're projecting for FY, in the normal cost, the rate will be 5.31 in 16, 5.31 in 17, and the unfunded liability state share, which is 100% of the UAL, is the state component, 17.06 in 16 and 17.38 in 17. I know this committee is the committee of jurisdiction over all things retirement, and perhaps have already looked at these numbers, and I expect you'll be hearing from the system themselves in terms of how they calculated the rates and how that impacts. Obviously, they send their calculations over. We build them into the baseline and work the budget up from there. The next page is a schedule history. I won't go through this, but this is for information for you to see the unfunded actuarial liability amortization schedule history. This is FY16 and FY17, so we're really beginning to bear down on the 2028 year when it comes to the forward payment retirement of the UAL. So we're beginning to move into, we're certainly starting to move into that 10-year range when it comes to the constitutional requirement. If there are any impacts on market impacts like we saw a few years ago that have to be averaged over a period of time, we're beginning to get into that 10-year window. But also, fortunately, beginning to see the light at the end of the tunnel as well. So it's encouraging. Then there's on the back page, a couple of clear assumptions related to the all other and the capital expenditures. The baseline all other budget is equal to the balance of FY15. All other budget authorized by the legislature unless the FY15 budget reflected an increase or decrease that's assumed to be a one-time adjustment. So that simply carries forward the adjustment into 16 and 17. And in terms of the capital expenditures, for programs, all capital expenditure requests, regardless of whether the budget is for the replacement of an existing item or the purchase of a new item, is reflected in the budget as an initiative. And for instance, you will see an initiative that we will be putting forward for $4 million in FY16 and $4 million in FY17 for capital expenditure. This is essentially the state's deferred capital maintenance, state-owned buildings, and we have a request put forward each year for an amount available for capital maintenance. So that is a walkthrough of that handout, again designed to provide you some of those underlying assumptions. Those all translate to big numbers and big major components of the budget. We're talking about retirement costs, UAL obligations, health insurance, dental benefits, and all the rest of it. So we want to lay that out for you. The second handout is titled
Are you taking questions at the end or on?
I hadn't considered. Do you have a question at this point?
I did, but I can wait.
Quick one? Put on my-
On the retired teachers' health insurance, the state share was amended from 45% back in 2003. Do you have the percentage for this year, what it comes down to? You have the numbers, but you didn't have the percentage.
We'll get that to you.
Thank you very much.
If there are any questions on that handout, then we can move to the general fund status. And this, again, is designed to provide you with a global overview of where we are in terms of the fund status. It doesn't take long before you really are diving into the details and the weeds, and it's nice to be able to at least have this high-level view. So what you see here in the first line, the general fund revenue. So this is the projected revenue after the most recent revenue forecasting committee projection, the December 1st projection. And then you see on the second line the baseline appropriations. So those essentially are the level of appropriation that moves forward from 15, that is the basis for the structural gap analysis back in September. And then the difference between each year. Then you begin to go through the budget, the revenue adjustments. And this just gives you some sense of the revenue adjustments. And many of these are related to the tax reform, tax relief package that's a component of the budget. So for instance, these, you see the amount related to park fees, which is a standalone, telecommunications tax repeal, that's an element of the tax package. The proposal to repeal the telecommunications tax and move it to the communities. The proposed changes to better embedding, the sales tax extension at the current rate. So that's where you see the dollar impact of the sales tax related proposals, which include the extension of the current rate to the end of the current calendar year, then the increase to 6.5% on January 1, and the impacts of the base expansion. So you see that, how that translates to the general fund. Also, running the same calculation to the service provider tax, and the estate tax phase out, and then the changes to the individual income tax phase rate reduction. Repeal of the municipal revenue sharing and the real estate transfer tax. So those are the major revenue adjustments and the impacts in both 16 and 17. Then the next category are selected other adjustments. The funding for the voluntary employee incentive program, the impact of the attrition initiative that I spoke to earlier, that's you see the difference between the 1.6 to the 3%. Callahan Mine restoration, which is a perennial favorite. And then the two funds for efficient delivery. The governor proposes in the budget to provide $5 million each year to the Fund for Efficient Delivery of Local and Regional Services, and $5 million each year to the Fund for the Efficient Delivery of Educational Services. The funds themselves were established many years ago during the first term of the Baldacci administration. They were not funded for a particularly long time. These are now providing the resources in those existing funds that are already on board. The changes that are proposed, the homestead exemption, which is in the tax package. The proposal is to eliminate the homestead exemption for households under the age of 65 and for residents in a household of 65 years of age and older. The exemption would double to $20,000. Funding of the Maine Technology Institute. The savings related to the MTI. This is the capital construction reserve that I spoke to earlier. Additional funding to provide general obligation and general fund debt service. Again, we have general fund, general obligation, debt service as a line item in the budget, and this is the additional amount above the baseline amount that we're carried forward from 15. So this represents additional funding for debt service for GO 16 and 17. And finally, the Main State Grant Program. The governor's budget includes an additional $5 million each year to go to the Main State Grant Program that's managed by the Finance Authority of Maine to provide student loan and student aid support for higher education. Subtotal of the adjustments, and then the departmental initiatives and requests. These are the accumulation of a variety of initiatives that are spread throughout the budget. This is the dollar impact, the beginning balance, and then finally the ending balance. So this shows you in a walkthrough your general fund status as impacted by the 16-17 proposal. Next handout is a table of contents, and we've provided this hopefully for useful reference to give you the assigned parts in the budget itself. So again, I'm sure you're familiar with these components, but just to outline them briefly. The Part A portion of the budget is in fact your appropriations and allocations section. The Part B component are reclassifications. Part C is traditionally and remains the GPA portion of the budget, outlining the FY16 allocation. And then you begin to move through the different language components that relate to initiatives that are embedded in the budget. And these are grouped together as best as we could thematically. So, for instance, when you move to D, you're starting to see the language that's related to the tax relief, tax reform package, and that continues through several sections, and then we move through all the way to the end. I'm not going to obviously go through all of these today, but I thought it would be handy if you had to take the contents all the way to triple X. But these are grouped by policy area and by theme as much as possible.
Appreciate it.
Finally, we have the 2016-2017 budget overview. And I know members of the committee received this document, but I thought it would be worthwhile, if you agree, to briefly walk through this, just to get what we see as the highlights in the budget. So in this handout, this is part of the 2016-2017 State of Maine biennial budget briefing. First of all, you have a 2-page letter from the governor entitled Governor Paul R. Page's Vision for Maine. And I think the letter very concisely and succinctly expresses the goals, the objectives, and the high points of major initiatives that are in the budget. There is the theme, of course, has been fairly consistent: tax reform, tax relief, changes to the Department of Health and Human Services programs as they relate to relieving the waitlist priorities and dealing with the drug issues in terms of the illegal drug trade in the state. Then we move into a narrative which I think is worth reading and reviewing, which talks about modernizing Maine's tax code. It provides some historic context, talks about the reduction of the individual and corporate income tax rates, and other components of the budget initiative in a narrative form that I think is helpful and provides context. If you go to page 14, then you have an outline on one page of the major elements of the tax reform, tax relief plan. And the high points here are to achieve competitiveness, improve Maine's competitiveness as it relates to the other states in the Northeast and the rest of the nation, to simplify the tax code, to stabilize the revenue stream, and to enhance fairness, overall fairness. When we look at the competitiveness objective, number one is to reduce the top margin individual income tax rate from 7.95% to 5.75%. Currently, Maine's top marginal rate is the 8th highest in the nation, and not only is it an extraordinarily high rate, individuals hit that rate at a very modest level of income. For an individual with a reported income of $20,190, they are hitting Maine's top rate. That is significantly different than what we see in other states that either have reducing the top rates and certainly avoid imposing the top rate on such a modest level of income. So the reduction in the individual rate is coupled with a dramatic expansion in the brackets as well, to make sure that middle, that roughly $20,000 to $100,000 household income receives a much greater benefit from the proposal. In addition, the package will cut taxes on all pensions. Currently, the first $10,000 of the pension income is exempt. The proposal would incrementally move that up $5,000 a year to $35,000 exempt, and would immediately provide an exemption for all retirement income on military pensions. That is designed to attract and retain military retirees. It's an element of attempting to address what we're confronted. We all know we're confronted with in terms of the natural growth of Maine's population. We've gone negative with our natural growth. Our deaths are now exceeding our births, and we need to retain and attract many of the members of the retirement community in particular that are fleeing the state for tax reasons, particularly military retirement. In that same vein, the proposal would repeal Maine's estate tax entirely, Maine is only one of 19 states that imposes a state tax, and puts us at a considerable disadvantage compared to other states. To put forward a responsible plan that is balanced and can be phased in, this proposal would include an increase in the sales tax rate and an expansion of the sales tax base. The general rate would increase to 6.5%. The rate on meals would be reduced from the current rate down to 6.5%, thereby equalizing the general and meals tax at 6.5%, and leaving the lodging tax at 8%, with a reduction from 10 to 8 on auto rentals. The goal here is to have fewer rates and move away from having multiple sales tax rates on different kinds of purchases. The 6% of the service provider tax that's the maximum allowed under federal law. That's the reason that one stands out as unchanged. For purposes of simplification, the proposal will repeal a number of income tax credits and loopholes. I know that, again, members of this committee and the taxation committee last session looked at the list of credits and deductions, and there was a real desire to simplify and to, as much as possible, flatten the tax code. The opportunity of reducing the rates provides that ability to repeal and eliminate any number of credits that are underutilized. And we can provide you with that information. The numbers of tax filers that utilize some of these credits is very small. Eliminate the corporate alternative minimum tax. That will be a major game changer for the state. Create a new credit for medical expenses. Eliminate itemized deductions. Transfer the telecommunications excise tax to the communities. Repeal the better program by transferring the property to Bay. The repeal of the better program in this budget is incremental at 25% the first year, 50% the second, 75% the third, 100% the fourth, and we would just simply move entirely into Betty. Incumbent retail that's already in better would remain in Betty for 10 years. No new retail would be brought into Betty. For enhancing stability, replace the municipal revenue sharing program. The revenue sharing proposal is to maintain flat funding in 16, the same level of funding that is being distributed to communities in 15, will remain the same in 16, and then repeal revenue sharing entirely in FY17, providing that 1-year transition. We want to strengthen the position of the Budget Stabilization Fund and improve the balance of the Budget Stabilization Fund, and modernize the sales tax base to include services with exemptions for sales to business. So significant broadening of the sales tax base to end-point consumption. Staples would not be included, so traditional food staples and many of the other staple items, but there are a broad range of categories of goods and services that would be brought into having the sales tax applied to them. To create and enhance the fairness, we would in fact create a sales tax fairness credit to provide relief for modernized sales tax base to lower income households. Be very straightforward on your tax return, file your return, and receive depending on it, aligned with the number of exemptions on the return, an amount of a credit, a refundable credit to offset the impact of the increase and broadening of the sales tax, and a significant expansion of the property tax fairness credit, which would, again, to folks that are seeing the 6% impact on their In other words, 6% of their income is subject to property tax. We receive a significant property tax fairness credit, and expanding the homestead exemption for elderly residents, repealed from the 65 and doubled to 65 dollars. The handout that you have will move through now, changes in the Department of Health and Human Services program, and I am more than happy to highlight those changes or allow the Commissioner to come in and provide a detail later as to what obviously will happen. Would you like me to continue to, I'm just checking with the committee to make sure.
We do have a more detailed briefing with HHS, but this was also designed for those listening behind you.
Just sorry.
What's that? Yes, there's people behind you. Quick highlights?
Sure.
On the
Yep.
agendas?
Yep. Yeah. So the takeaway from the Department of Health and Human Services and the Medicaid program here is that you have a budget submission that is reflecting stability in the funding in the Medicaid account, the Medicaid program, and the opportunity then to realign funding and prioritize other priorities in addition to Medicaid that the government has been seeking to deal with. So the first couple of pages, you see a dialogue of the history and a highlight of investing in critical priorities. So in terms of the critical priority investments, this proposal will include $46 million for provide services for the elderly and the disabled, $24 million in additional funding for nursing homes, $28 million to ensure quality access to primary care, and $14 million to fund mental health services to fully fund the obligations for the class members under the consent decree. The breakdown